Hi, everyone. So, welcome to the most popular panel of Atmosphere America. At least in the previous years, it's definitely been the most popular one, and the one that tends to get the most questions as well. So we've got a great lineup, actually. 6 speakers, 5 presentations from different perspectives, from California, from Quebec, from an leading industry association, from a leading NGO, and also from an industry player that's very active on the regulatory front. So we've got very different perspectives, which I think will complement each other. So the rule book, we've got a poll, we've got questions, people can ask questions and obviously comment, as I've explained just now in the opening session. And I've asked speakers to try and stick to 10 to 12 minutes per presentation so that we get maybe one question at the end of each presentation before we have a general Q&A. First off, we have Glenn from California. So air pollution specialist. I don't know if that's really a fair summary of your bio, but basically Glenn's been working with air pollution issues for F-gas issues for 20 plus years, and you've spoken numerous times at Atmosphere. So you're a regular and always a popular speaker at this event. So great to have you back. And we're going to hear today basically what California has been working on and what California is planning to do in the coming years. And as we all know, California has tended to be the leading state in the US when it comes to HFC regulations and the promotion, I don't know if that's the right word, but at least allowing for alternatives to come on the market faster. So over to you, Glenn.
Thank you. Let me know when you can see a screen. Okay. Can you see my screen with the online?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Mark. I'm pleased to present the proposed refrigeration and air conditioning regulations in California. In today's presentation, I'll provide some background, regulation requirements, next steps, and future considerations on low GWP global warming potential refrigerants. Now, currently, HFCs comprise about 4% of all greenhouse gases in California. Although they're the fastest growing source of greenhouses in California, the US, and the world. Now, the red line in this figure shows that business as usual emissions of HFCs will continue to increase without additional mitigation measures. California is required to reduce all greenhouse gases 40% by 2030. And Senate Bill SB 1383 specifically requires a 40% reduction in HFC emissions. Those are emissions, not just consumption, emissions below 2013 levels by the year 2030. That's about 1/2 of today's emissions. So that's very, very challenging. California currently has existing HFC regulations in the Refrigerant Management Program, RMP. Our state has also adopted the HFC prohibitions of the former US EPA SNAP Rules 20 and 21, except for mobile vehicle air conditioning. And these affect almost all refrigeration equipment. The regulation bans the highest GWP refrigerants in new stationary refrigeration equipment, for example, 404A and 507A. And now I'll discuss the proposed regulations for refrigeration and air conditioning in California. New refrigeration equipment in new facilities is required to use refrigerants with a GWP of less than 150 beginning January 1st, 2022. The regulation applies to all non-residential refrigeration equipment with a refrigerant charge size greater than 50 pounds, which is 22.7 kilograms. In addition, national supermarket chains and retail food facilities with 20 or more stores in California must achieve a weighted average GWP of less than 2,500 by 2026, or they can reduce their GHG, greenhouse gas potential, by 25% or more by 2026. The weighted average GWP means the sum of the charge in pounds or mass of all the refrigerants multiplied by the GWP divided by the charge in pounds. The GHG potential takes into account the charge size. It is the charge size in mass multiplied by each refrigerant's GWP. So the easiest way to achieve the first one is to use a lot of low GWP refrigerant, and the GHG potential, you can achieve that by reducing your charge size quite a bit. And you could probably still use a higher GWP refrigerant. All stores must achieve an average GWP of less than 1,400 by 2030, or reduce their GHG potential by 55% or more by 2030. For stationary air conditioning, all new equipment must use a refrigerant with a GWP of less than 750 by January 1st, 2023. This applies to all charge sizes of AC equipment, from the smallest window units to the largest. Chillers are actually included separately, but they also have a 750 limit. Equipment manufacturers, or OEMs, have asked for a 2-year delay in the AC regulation due to codes and standards that do not currently allow the use of lower flammability A2L refrigerants. CARB is considering additional compliance options for industry to offset emissions for equipment manufactured with R410A in 2023 and 2024. One of the options under consideration is to allow the use of reclaimed R410A in the initial charge and for the lifetime servicing for AC units built in 2023 and 2024. The details still have to be worked out. CARB is evaluating proposals submitted by the industry, AHRI, Trade Association, and EIA, a GMO. The next steps. The draft proposed regulation was made public yesterday. It's available on our website, the one listed, or it's really just easier to search for CARB HFC rulemaking. The 45-day comment period begins this Friday, October 23rd. We encourage you to submit written comments. Note that if you submit written comments, they do become part of the public record, and we really take these comments seriously, whether you're pro, con, you like some parts of it, you don't like other parts of it. We read them very, very thoroughly. The board hearing on the proposed regulation is December 10th or 11th. They always say it could be one or the other days. Right now, we're almost sure it's December 10th. It's remote attendance only, and you can go to it by going to the website listed or just search for CARB board meeting dates. And EIA is actually an NGO. I think I said it was a GMO. For future considerations, the governor's executive order has directed California to achieve carbon neutrality or net zero greenhouse gas emissions in California by 2045. This is a huge undertaking. The role of HFCs and other non-CO2 greenhouse gases in achieving carbon neutrality is still being determined. We're not exactly sure how they're going to be counted, and if they're completely counted, and these have huge GWPs, and even with a phase down with a 15% remaining, that's a lot of offsetting if that's going to be required. Or we might just say you can't use anything with a very high GWP. All the indicators point towards using only the lowest global warming potential refrigerants available. So I'm not saying this is a done deal, but if we have to achieve carbon neutrality, it has to be with the lowest GWP. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Just want to make sure that people have submitted questions, and so far you haven't had any, but I will ask you one. This net neutrality goal for 2045, that's a huge deal. and carbon neutrality goal, sorry, for 2045. That basically means that all these new regulations that are coming out over the coming year and so, we already know that they're going to have to be updated very quickly in order to meet that 2045 goal, right?
Correct. Yeah, correct. That's a good assumption. Right now, we have not announced additional regulations, but I think it's pretty obvious to meet that carbon neutrality goal, 0 GHG emissions. Between now and 2030 or 2035, there will be additional refrigeration and air conditioning regulations. I mean, I think it's inevitable, but right now we don't have a written policy on that. I would expect to see something in the next 2 to 3 years, and we can let industry and everyone know where we're going with this. And you know, there remains a lot of work to be done, I think, in non-vapor compression technologies. I know it's futuristic, but again, you know, our goal is 25 years in the future. That's a generation away.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. There's a poll question here. I'll ask each panelist if they agree. Will a Biden victory reinstate tougher HFC policies? Yes or no? Are you allowed to answer that, Glenn?
Definitely.
Okay. Am I allowed to ask you, if Trump stays, what does that mean for the California approach?
We intend, I'm trying to echo our fearless leader, Mary Nichols, the board chair. We intend to proceed with all air pollution and greenhouse gas global warming regulations we have begun, and we intend to go further than the rest of the country if necessary. As I always state, California doesn't necessarily want to have any different air pollution regulations than the rest of the country. We just seem to be a little ahead of the curve most of the time. So we're just going to go right on ahead, and our Attorney General has sued the US EPA more than a dozen times in the last 4 years. So
okay.
So we will stay the course.
All right. So a strong message there. All right. Thank you, Glenn. Hopefully we'll get more questions for you towards the end of the session. So next up, we have Tony, all right, from the IIAR, the leading industry association in North America, mostly known for its track record on ammonia, given that it was the International Institute of Ammonia Refrigeration, but I think that is no longer the name that they use, it's just IIAR. But what we've seen over the recent years, IIAR is now is positioned itself as the leading industry.
You see the screen?
For not just ammonia, but also CO2 and increasingly hydrocarbons. So now we're going to hear a little bit from Tony about what they're working on in terms of standards. So over to you.
Do you see the cover page from Atmosphere?
No, we don't. We only see you.
Let me find out why it's not popping in here. It should be popping in. It's not giving me an option to select it. So
I have your slides if you need them.
Hey, Tony, did you click the share screen, the green button at the bottom of the Zoom window?
I see is share. I'm sharing the screen.
Not yet. Can you click the button again that says share screen?
Click it again.
Yeah. And then a menu should come up where you can select the screen to share.
Yeah, I don't see it in the selection. Sorry. Yep.
Okay.
You could just click desktop and that'll share your whole screen.
I see my camera there. Does this work for you?
Click OK on that. There's a message that says OK.
Yeah.
Yeah, on that. Yeah, I'm not sure. It was working this morning. You know, I have your slides. I can pull them up and then you can tell me when you want me to move through them. Yeah?
Yeah. Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
If you pull them up, that's fine.
Yeah, I have them right here.
So that's 2 minutes less, Tony.
Yeah, I'll have to talk faster. Is he pulling them up? I don't see him.
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
Sure.
I have to, there's a lot of presentations to go through. I have them here.
Yeah.
Wait, I've got questions. So whilst Tony's finding that presentation, we got 2 questions. One from Christopher Muller. Approvals of A2L refrigerants seem to be sensitive to many groups due to safety issues. Is this a major consideration in CARB proposals, or are you leaving that to other agencies? That's one for you, Glenn.
CARB does not set safety standards. Therefore, we are willing to work with everybody to try to move forward with lower GWP refrigerants. We're well aware of the fact that A2Ls are not allowed. They're just simply not allowed in any charge size probably greater than about 3 pounds or 2 kilograms. So we leave the safety standards to the ULs of the world, AHRIs. In California, it's the fire marshal has the final say, and then it goes into the Uniform Mechanical Code. So since we're well aware of that, we are willing to work with OEMs to try to come up with what we're calling alternative or other compliance options with a lot of reclaimed R410A used.
Okay, I guess if Christopher needs clarification, he can submit a comment on the live discussion. All right, okay. Are we ready, Franco?
Yeah, we're ready to go. So Tony,
right,
just
Tony.
say next when you're ready for the next slide.
Yeah. Okay, you can go to the next. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, and then thank you for letting me provide the standards. Go to the next one. So yeah, thank you for letting me provide an IIR suite of standards update. I want to mention that IIAR is an accredited ANSI standards developer, also known as a standards developer organization, or SDO. Next slide. We have a suite of standards developed for closed circuit ammonia refrigeration systems of 9 standards. So here as they are follows: IIR 1, definitions and terminology used in IIR standards; IIR 2, safe design; IIR 3, ammonia refrigeration valves, which pertains to the minimum performance criteria for the valves. Installation is IIR 4. IIR 5 is startup. IIR 6 is inspection, testing, and maintenance. IIR 7 is developing operating procedures, which strictly focuses on ammonia refrigeration systems. IIR 8, decommissioning. And IIR 9, the minimum system safety requirements for closed circuit ammonia refrigeration system. So that's the suite of standards for the ammonia, which is 9 standards. So go to the next slide. And I want to let you know that there are 2 other non-ammonia natural refrigerant standards that are in development at this time that pertain to carbon dioxide and hydrocarbons. The next slide. The IIR CO2 standard in development's title is Safety Standard for Closed Circuit Carbon Dioxide Refrigeration Systems, and it specifies minimum requirements for design, installation, startup, inspection, testing, and maintenance, and it applies to commercial and industrial CO2 refrigeration systems. Next. Now, there's 6 group assignments, A through F, as shown here, that were arranged to do the homework to get the information for each of these groups. So I won't read each one, but you can see there's A through F group there. So the standard from these 6 groups actually turn the standard into 6 different parts, which is, you go to the next slide. So the part 1 general covers 3 chapters. Chapters 1 through 3, it kicks it off. Purpose, scope, applicability, definitions, reference standards. Next slide. And part 2 covers design considerations affecting construction, and that consists of the 10 chapters here, chapters 4 through 13. Next slide. Part 3 covers installation, consisting of 5 chapters, chapters 14 through 18. Next slide. Part 4 covers startup of new systems and additions or modifications to existing systems, consisting of 3 chapters, chapters 19 through 21. And part 5, inspection, testing, and maintenance, is done with 1 chapter, chapter 22. And then we have part 6, the appendices. They address 4 of the appendices there. Appendix A, explanatory material. Appendix B covers CO2 concentration levels and expected effects on human health. Appendix C includes the guidance for avoiding component failure in refrigeration systems caused by abnormal pressure shock. And Appendix D has information for risk-based inspection, testing, and maintenance. Now, we are targeting the IIR CO2's third public review to be out next month in November 2020, and it'll end sometime before the year-end holidays. So that's our target. Next slide. Now, the IIAR hydrocarbon HC standard in development's title is Safety Standard for Closed Circuit Refrigeration Systems Utilizing Hydrocarbon Refrigerants. Presently, refrigeration design standards provide only general design guidance for such systems. And this standard will reflect the current general design guidance and is envisioned to address minimum safety requirements for design, installation, startup, inspection, testing, and maintenance for refrigeration systems that use naturally occurring hydrocarbons. And this standard will apply to the refrigeration systems that are not regulated by listing agencies. Next slide. Presently, the standard in development specifically applies to the following natural hydrocarbons: propane, propylene, butane, isobutane, ethane, and ethylene reserved. Next slide. The standard is being developed as a volunteer effort under an IIAR hydrocarbon subcommittee task group of the IIR Standards Committee, and is presently has 20 members on it. And the timeline for completion of this standards development will take several months, at least a year or even more. Tentatively, we want to target for November 2021 or no later than into 2022. Now, the results to complete the standard in development more than likely will be impacted by work done on the UL test-based standards. If you've heard of 60335-2-40, and that would be more in regards to the heat pumps for us. And then the UL test-based standard 60335-2-89 would be more related to grocery store equipment. And by working, and that's also the working done by ASHRAE, they're trying to update clarification requirements for calculating refrigerant concentration limits, RCLs, in air from a release. That may affect this standard by the time their work is completed and it's announced. So next slide. The standard will make exception for those systems listed as approved agencies, which today is 150 grams or less of charge. And the listed 150 grams or less of charge will cover, obviously, the smaller units, and that includes the ones in hallways and corridors or lobbies. And due to the outcome of the UL test-based standards mentioned, the allowable charge may go up 300 grams for self-contained units with doors or drawers, or 500 grams for open cases and ice makers under UL revisions. And they will still be exempt. If they come up to that level, they still will be exempt from this standard. And I want to cover a little bit more on regards to that for the next slide. The current work of the IRHC subcommittee group right now is in determination of all the requirements for the IFC, IMC, UMC, NFPA, and other codes and standards that govern some portions of hydrocarbon refrigeration systems here in the United States. And then the standard development will permit listed equipment to be utilized as assembled or fabricated portions of larger size hydrocarbon refrigeration systems. So I want you to be aware that if it's listed, the standard doesn't cover the listed equipment, the listed standard itself covers it, but you can use a listed equipment to develop a larger system. And examples of listed equipment that could be used to build a larger system would be a valve component or device, a smaller chiller, or even a small open case section for such as like a grocery store. So at the last slide, we have an issues list, which has the following item. We're looking at overpressure protection relief valves, PRVs, will probably not be permitted to vent directly to the atmosphere. Machine room or outdoor installations will more than likely require National Electrical Code Class 1 Division 2 electrical systems. And training on proper service techniques is seen as very key. So service techniques is one of the main keys. So training is going to be very important for these systems. And next slide, once the standard is developed, there are some final approvals required to meet. So the IIR procedures have to be met that also meet the ANSI and CETRA requirements. And the next slide shows that a developed, if you go to the next slide, a developed consensus body that will review and vote on the standard's content, and that the ANSI process was met for developing the standard. The standards committee then reviews and votes on the standard's content and submits a request to the IIR board of directors to approve the standard. And the IIR board of directors votes to approve the standard publication after they've reviewed it and accepted or approved it themselves. And then the ANSI board of standards, BSR, board of standards review, they review and approve the standard. And if so, it's approved, then we can have a published, and we have a published standard. So next slide, and I thank you for listening. Let's see if you have a question at this time.
Thank you, Tony. That's a lot of standards and chapters and sections, but the message here is that IIR is not only ammonia, it's CO2, and now that's my timer for you. So you met your time. Well done. Is also focusing increasingly on hydrocarbons because you're seeing an opportunity there, right, to establish the standards. Correct?
That is correct.
You want the hydrocarbon part of the industry to get
we'll say natural hydrocarbons, zero.
No blends. Correct.
Low global warming potential. Yes.
Yeah, no hydrocarbon blends. That was a deliberate decision, correct?
That is correct at this time.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any questions for Tony? I'm looking now. Yes, question for Tony. There are already hundreds of CO2 systems being used in the US. I assume they were designed using existing standards. What is the value of having a new CO2 standard? And then the second question is, were existing standards inadequate?
Yeah, what's out there is existing, as I mentioned in one of the slides, that there's just general guidance information. There's no detail. It doesn't have installation, startup. It doesn't have inspection, testing, and maintenance requirements. And we're going to bring that to the table to build beyond just some general guidance that was already out there. So this will provide the details and continue to continuously improve as we improve it. But we want to get, obviously, the first draft and incorporate all that.
Okay. Second question from Michael, actually. What size hydrocarbon equipment will the IIAR standard typically apply to?
The systems itself is going to be, it can be as large as so be it. It all depends on to make sure that it meets the requirements and it's safe. So it's very small systems, the typical less than the small amounts that are listed will be able to be used to build a larger system, but a listed piece of equipment will sustain on its own standard. But beyond that, if it's a portion of a system or it's a larger system, and then we will be able to cover it. And there'll be
your aim is to basically cover the whole market, right?
Yes, that's correct. And right now this is focusing strictly on the commercial and industrial, yes.
Okay, that's a big deal.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. I think people are slowly understanding that. They're starting to see that's going to be a big change for the industry in the US in particular. All right. Okay. So thank you, Tony. You'll probably get more questions at the end.
You're welcome.
Maybe you can answer that poll. We've had 45 people vote. So maybe, will a Biden victory reinstate tougher HFC policies? Yes or no? Do you agree?
Can you read the question?
Will a Biden victory, Joe Biden victory, reinstate tougher HFC policies? Yes,
that I do not know the exact answer on that, but we're proceeding that as long as systems are safe and whatever size they be, they're going to fall under either a listed or a non-listed
good answer.
system.
Yes. You're a politician. You can be a politician. Yeah, that's really good.
I'm a musician and an artist behind me. But so
that's a good one. All right. Okay. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, we got one more question, but I'll leave that to the end. Next, we have on the list, we have Emerson. So we have a duo, and we have Rajan, who is Vice President, Systems Innovation Center and Sustainability at Emerson. Multiple degrees, including mechanical engineering, PhD, and MBAs, and he's well known in the industry. So he's a thought leader in the US and beyond. And then we have Jennifer, who's the regulatory affairs manager of Emerson. So I'm guessing spending a lot of time in DC and other capitals, engaging with different associations and so forth. So representing Emerson's opinion on any regulations, codes, and standards. So they've got a great presentation. So over to you guys.
Thank you. All right, is that displaying full screen for everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Perfect, thank you.
So today our focus is really the North American regulation of refrigerants and the transition to lower GWPs. So we'll be covering both US and some high-level Canadian regulations. Just a disclaimer that we do believe this information is the latest, but please confirm all facts prior to making any company or business decisions on this information. So in the US, we have faced many legal challenges in the last several years, and that's really led us to some uncertainty as far as US federal regulations and refrigerant policy. In the US, the Environmental Protection Agency evaluates and lists the acceptable substitutes under their Significant New Alternatives Policy, or SNAP. They release rules through proposed rulemaking, and then it's available for notice or for comment, public comment, and then they publish the final rule. In 2015 and 2016, just to level set, they had passed SNAP Rules 20 and 21, which were very significant in phasing down the higher global warming potential HFCs in several commercial refrigeration applications. And in 2017, the federal court, there was a court challenge to SNAP Rule 20 and 21, but they handled SNAP Rule 20 first. And in 2017, the federal court did vacate SNAP Rule 20 on the basis that the EPA didn't have authority under the Clean Air Act to regulate non-ozone depleting substances. In response, the EPA released a guidance document that they would not enforce the HFC delistings under SNAP Rule 20. And then subsequently, SNAP Rule 21 was picked up and handled in the same manner. Another response to that 2017 court ruling was that EPA went back and looked at Section 608, which is really the leak repair and leak provisions and the refrigerant management program that we had at the federal level, and they evaluated their ability to require leak repair for non-ozone depleting substances, such as the substitutes of HFCs, HFOs, PFCs, and earlier this year rolled that back as well as it applied to these substitutes. It is still required for the ozone depleting substances, but not for any of the substitutes. The remainder of Section 608 does remain in force. There was another lawsuit with results coming in April of 2020. So again, just earlier this year, that lawsuit really said that the way the EPA announced that they were not going to enforce the HFC delistings followed improper policy procedures, that it didn't have notice and comment period. And so once again, the SNAP program and the ability to regulate HFCs and how they're going to handle Rules 20 and 21 at the federal level remains to be seen. And at this point, we're waiting for further response from the EPA on this. A piece of good information, however, is that EPA did propose SNAP Rule 23 earlier this year. It was available for public comment. This rule provided 3 additional alternatives for commercial refrigeration: R448A, R449A, R449B, subject to narrow use limits as proposed. There were lots of pieces of feedback submitted, and we are currently awaiting EPA's final rule on this SNAP listing. In addition to commercial refrigeration, I just want to mention there were some air conditioning refrigerants as well in that rule, but we're not going to focus on that today. The good news here is that EPA does continue to evaluate new refrigerants and list additional substitutes as available. So even though the court ruling in 2017 calls into question their authority to regulate non-ozone depleting substances, they are still able to evaluate new refrigerants per end use. And that's something that industry needs to move forward. Lacking federal regulations, US states have really stepped up and taken action and taken the forefront on the refrigerant regulation. This group of states on the right in the map that you see are the US Climate Alliance states. There's 25 members in this group, and they really lead on climate policy and in general, these refrigerant regulations. So far, the majority of that has been through the adoption of SNAP 20 and 21. As Glenn mentioned, California was the first to adopt SNAP rules 20 and 21 into state law. That regulation is currently adopted or pending in 16 states, all members of the US Climate Alliance. And then taking it a step further, California has now proposed those additional measures, which Glenn mentioned a few minutes ago. And so from an industry perspective, you know, we really, in order to make this transition consistent and as simple as possible and safe and all of that, we really desire consistency across the states. And so industry has been involved in communicating with the US Climate Alliance on ways that they can consistently implement this rule to allow for a better transition.
Good, thank you, Jennifer. So you heard two things from Jennifer. One was the fact that the EPA's authority to regulate HFCs was being questioned and challenged. And the second thing you heard was that in light of that, many of the states, with California taking the lead, as you heard from Glenn, going their own path, and lack of consistency and uncertainty is extremely difficult for industry, and I don't need to tell any of you that. But what has been happening, regardless of who is in the administration, what has been happening is that there are two bills that are in Congress. One of them is what is called the AIM Act, and that is in the Senate. That was introduced by a bipartisan group. And then the second one is actually the House version of the same AIM Leadership Act. And that was introduced also by a bipartisan group. And the interesting thing about both of these bills is they are staying true to the phase down production and consumption of HFCs, aligning with the Kigali Amendment. And in addition to that, they give authority to the EPA to regulate HFCs, and the objective being to promote investment, technology investment, to promote jobs, to promote innovation. There are lots and lots of companies and jobs that are at stake in the United States, and therefore a federal approach would lead to a lot more consistency and a lot more certainty, and that's what these two bills aim to do. If you can, if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you'll notice that it shows essentially if these two bills pass, whether they pass in now or during the lame duck session or immediately after the new administration, whichever administration comes into effect next year. Regardless of that, we think that the general model could be that California may take a little bit of a lead, but the rest of the country couldn't be that far behind. Now, I don't know to what extent the Canadian regulation is going to be covered, but I will just leave it at this, that in Canada did sign the Kigali Amendment, they ratified it, and they've got a combination of specific sector-based limits, and that is supposed to facilitate this phase down steps. And I think the table on the left-hand side shows you exactly what those limits are. And there is Quebec, and I'm going to not cover this because there is a lot more detail that you're going to hear in just a minute or two. With that, I'm going to stop there, and thank you for having us, and thank you for listening. And Mark, back to you in case there are any questions.
Thank you, Jennifer and Rajan. I'm just seeing right now, I'm just checking the chat to see if there are any questions related to your presentation. So far, none. So I guess what I'll do is I'll allow people to submit more questions in the general Q&A after.
You're fine.
And you stuck to the deadline. Thank you. So we're definitely going to have lots of Q&A time, which is great. So Okay, I guess now we have Christina. Ah, wait, question just popped up. Yay! So question from Michael. Thank you, Michael. Would federal bill get through if Trump remains?
I don't think these two bills did have wide support, not only from the industry but also from both parties.
Bipartisan, right?
It's a bipartisan bill, and it's a bill that clearly will lead to more jobs and innovation and continued leadership that we desire here. So I think it is probably not important as to who comes in January. Regardless of that, I think this bill will find its way out. That's our hope.
Okay. Okay. I have a follow-up question for that one, but I'll wait until the end.
Okay.
I'm guessing California is going to be getting that question. Well, I'll ask it now. Is it going to be enough, this bill? I'm thinking, if you're California, are you going to be happy enough with what they're trying to do at the federal level here? Or are you going to say, no, it's not enough, we've got to go further, and you relate to the fact that you got this carbon neutrality target? Yeah.
Well, CARB is somewhat neutral on this bill, although initially, of course, we're in favor of anything that reduces HFC production and consumption. I suppose there's no secret that we think it does not quite go far enough, but our official position is we're sort of cautiously optimistic that it's a good bill. There's not too many exemptions. There are a few carve-outs here and there, which are interesting. But in general, it's the same as the Kigali Amendment. So yeah, it's a good thing. In fact, it's part of our strategy to achieve our 40% reduction by 2030. So we are counting on it.
So you're basically saying it's just basically implementing Kigali, right?
Correct. Yeah, correct. It really doesn't go any further. And yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
But
okay.
We kind of view it as a good start.
All right. Then we got another question for Emerson. Is there a discussion in California or at the federal level of legislation about providing subsidies to promote low greenhouse gas or GWP systems / refrigerants? Are there any, discussions at that level? Are you aware of any?
No, not to my knowledge. And I think that's Glenn can answer the question as far as California is concerned.
Yes, we do have an incentive program that has $1 million in funding, which, let's face it, doesn't go very far in the big picture of things. What we would hope is that our counterparts in the public utilities, the electrical, the California Energy Commission, the CPUC, whatever, the California Public Utilities Commission, they have billions of dollars to spend on energy efficiency. So we would hope that AC manufacturers, refrigerant manufacturers, end users could get together with the electrical regulators and say, look, we need incentive money to go energy efficient and low GWP. So I think if you combine those, that's where the money is. CARB does not have the money for that sort of thing.
Message clear. Okay, thanks, guys. Next up, we have Christina. So Christina works for IIA, a leading NGO in our space, in the cooling space and beyond. She is a senior policy analyst based in DC. And she leads the domestic policy work for the IIA, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what they've been doing on the standards level and more. So over to you, Christina.
Unmuting. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Mark, for the introduction. Can everyone see can you see my screen, Mark? Great. So just a quick introduction for anyone not familiar with IIA. We are an international NGO or GMO, whatever you'd prefer to call us, with offices in Washington, DC and London. And our climate campaign is very focused on this issue of fluorinated greenhouse gases and refrigerants. We've been working at the Montreal Protocol and around the world on this issue for several decades. And I represent EIA on several safety standards committees with underwriters laboratories and keep very close track of this, as well as all the regulatory issues. So for today's presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of updating safety standards to unlock climate benefits that we need, as well as some updates on the proposals in this space. So first, just a quick reminder on the big picture here on what's driving this need for the regulations. Many of you are well familiar with this graph, but it really just shows very dramatically why we really must make a big change in refrigerants very soon to avoid massive growth in emissions because of this really exponential growth in cooling demand over the next few decades. And the biggest policy driver up until this point has, of course, been the Montreal Protocol. There are some very important deadlines coming up in 2025 and 2030 for countries to reduce their consumption of HCFCs and HFCs. So developing countries in particular in 2025 have a deadline to reduce HCFCs by almost 70%. And it will be really ideal if we have safety standards in place that enable technologies to leapfrog HFCs in this process. So that would be a big driver of achieving more emission reductions under the Montreal Protocol. Now, Montreal Protocol is not the only driver here, and we've heard this a bit in the keynote yesterday, as well as in Glenn's presentation talking about California. But net zero emissions is really the biggest driver and will be the biggest driver in the decade to come. And so a growing number of countries have these net zero targets in place, rapidly increasing over the past couple of years, and we see more and more, including China. And this has some significant implications for refrigerants, because when you think about it, it takes about 15 to 20 years, perhaps longer, to really replace refrigerants in existing systems in the installed base. And so we really should be, if you think about it, to achieve net zero emissions from refrigerants, be out of all HFCs in new equipment starting around 2030. That's 1 decade from now. And right now, we're really not on track to do that. And then the other thing I'll mention about net zero targets is decarbonizing buildings becomes a really big topic as well. And this is a big opportunity in the cooling space for business. This is why, I don't know if anyone has heard this, but even Elon Musk has been recently quoted as considering getting into the residential heat pump space. So this is a big opportunity for innovation with low GWP refrigerants. Now, this brings me to the topic of standards for flammable refrigerants and how they create market barriers for hydrocarbons and other low GWP flammable alternatives, but these can be overcome. So, these outdated standards that we have in place in many cases now limit the charge sizes, making it either infeasible or not cost effective to design with these refrigerants. Fortunately, we know there are a number of ways that we can update these standards to account for various safety mitigation measures that allow us to maintain the same level of safety. And these are updates many of us are aware of, such as ensuring sufficient airflow, robust design, leak detection, and things like this. And these are all designed to ensure that a flammable concentration does not occur if there is a rare event of a catastrophic leak. So there are 2 key proposals in the standards world right now for commercial refrigeration and for air conditioning. The air conditioning proposal is actually at IEC is actually open for a vote right now as we speak until October 30th and has a target publication date next year in 2021. And then the refrigeration proposal is much further along, has been already adopted at the IEC level and is now in the process of trickling into the national and regional standards. And I'll talk a bit more in detail about that. Now, this flow diagram at the bottom of the slide is just meant for those who are not familiar with this process to see as an example of how this typically happens, where standards proposals often start at the international level and then have to flow down into national or regional standards in many cases. and in some countries even then have to be subsequently adopted into national regulations and building codes, as is the case here in the United States. So a few details on the commercial refrigeration proposal. There are some key differences between what was adopted by the IEC and what is now being considered for adoption under Underwriters Laboratory and in Canada as well. And in both cases, there is the same amount of flammable refrigerant, or there's the same test that you have to pass if you're using more than 150 grams of flammable refrigerant. However, the key difference when it comes to self-contained equipment is that for the IEC, you are able to use up to 500 grams or 13 times the lower flammability limit for any self-contained equipment, whereas in the UL standard proposal, you have this differentiation between equipment that has doors or drawers, such as ice makers, which is limited to 8 times the LFL or 300 grams of R290. So that's a really key difference here, but otherwise, there are a lot of similarities here. And this proposal is moving forward soon for a vote under UL. And in fact, globally, it's moving forward in a lot of countries. So not only under UL and CSA, but Australia and New Zealand have already adopted the IEC standard. Europe is in progress, and Japan. And so we see this really moving forward quite quickly in the next year and being adopted in a lot of places. And just to touch on the real world implications of this for stores of the future, you know, these larger charge sizes open up a lot of future possibilities for a full store design using hydrocarbon cases. It's already feasible with 150 grams, but, you know, as this recent example I have here from the UK sort of exemplifies, you'd be able to design with much larger size equipment, meaning fewer pieces of equipment for a given installation. And all of this adds up to more HFC-free options in supermarkets. So now on the air conditioning side, to talk a bit about that proposal, things are a bit earlier in the process. We're still at the IEC, where there is a CDV, which is the initial draft proposal, open for vote right now. And this covers all flammable refrigerants, including A3 refrigerants, but in particular, with regard to natural refrigerants for hydrocarbons, which are A3 refrigerants, it allows up to 988, almost a kilogram of R290 in a standard split air conditioning system. And it looks at a variety of different safety measures to get to those increased charge sizes. And if someone is interested in more detail on this, we do have a briefing on EIA's website, and you can go look at this link later to learn more about all these different measures and the process that IEC will be going through. So we expect this is the first of 2 rounds of voting. If the proposal passes through this round, it will go to a final stage next year and another round of voting, incorporating any substantive comments, and I hopefully be published towards the end of 2021. So wrapping up, what comes next for safety standards, particularly here in the US, the commercial refrigeration standard we expect under UL to be published early to mid of next year. We'd also expect to see an EPA SNAP listing rule proposed in 2021 and proposals moving forward for that. Those changes to then be adopted into ASHRAE 15, as well as subsequently model and state building codes. On the air conditioning side, I would say things are a little bit more uncertain. I think there's a question as to whether North America will decide to harmonize with IEC's proposal, and particularly looking seriously at the A3 refrigerants, but that's a question mark. I hope it will be. And there is a UL, I want to flag here, a UL call for proposals right now for the UL air conditioning standards open till December 31st. It's been extended. And that is for consideration of proposals to be considered in the next round of changes to the UL standard. And that's it for me on standards. Thank you so much for listening. Happy to take questions.
Excellent presentation, Christina. lots of questions, but I've got plenty, but I'm gonna let the I'm gonna open to the floor. So I've got one here from Brian. Say, what methods are manufacturers using to mitigate the risk of flammable refrigerants reaching the LFL during leak events?
Yeah, so there are a variety of different ways that this can be done and that standards typically allow for. So this could be, for example, by ensuring simply by ensuring a certain amount of airflow is present, using a fan. That would be the simplest way. In other cases, you might have a detector, which would detect the presence of a leak and then either turn on a fan, or in the case of larger types of systems, have a shut-off valves that would limit the amount of refrigerant that could leak out of the system. Other things might include a more robust design. So the equipment has to be more resistant to leaks in the first place and pass certain tests related to vibrations and locate certain components outside, for example, or not in the indoor space. So there's really a variety of different ways, and standards provide a number of options for manufacturers to do this.
Great, thank you. There are more general questions that I think I want to have time at the end. So we've got about 20 minutes. Sorry, Franco, we're going to eat into a little coffee break there. But we want to have time to obviously allow Pierre-Luc to present. So, and then have a general Q&A at the end. So Pierre-Luc is coming from Quebec. I like to think of Quebec as the California of Canada in terms of being at the forefront of legislation with regard to HFCs and alternatives. I don't know if Pierre-Luc will agree on that, but we've got a presentation from him where he's going to update a little bit on what they're working on and what they've decided. So it'll be interesting to hear what are the parallels with, say, California and the rest of the US. So over to you, Pierre-Luc. And he's a chemist and has been working for the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change of Quebec since 2014. Over to you, Pierre-Luc.
Yes. You can see my presentation?
Yes.
So, hi everybody. I'm here to present the regulation amending the regulation respecting our carbon. So, hotel presentation plan. I'm go with the introduction. So we have adopted a new regulation in April. The regulation was part of the climate change action plan of our government. And the main goal of this regulation is reduce the release of carbon in the air, and particularly the IGWP refrigerant. I'll go with the main amendment of our new regulation. So the section 21.1 said as of January 1st, 2021, there are GWP limit of 150 for preserved food in systems. So it's about the big system with a power rating equal or greater than 50 kilowatt. So if you use the preserved food, we mean a supermarket or warehouse for storage of food. This This means installation of equipment. So in Quebec, we can servicing the old system, and it's just about new installation, new building, we have a limit. The other section, it's about commercial, institutional refrigerant in general, and these limit is 1,500, the GWP limit. We also have a measure for the transport refrigeration with a limit of 2,200 in 2025. And the last measure in refrigeration is about the equipment chiller, and the GWP limit is 750. All this measure is about installing, selling equipment, so we can do reparation or fill the old system if needed. There are exceptions for these measures. It's not applicable for system design to maintain internal temperature equal or less than -50, or if it's import or manufactured with an essential purpose permit derived by Environment and Climate Change Canada, and it's not cover the system they are sold outside Quebec. And we have another measure for limitation of GWP of carbon. So this is for plastic foam. It's not in refrigeration, but it's a limit of 150 for manufacturing plastic foam, and also a measure in July 2021 for selling this product. They also have exception for section 39 is if the plastic form or product is used for military, space, or aeronautical purpose, or if the plastic form or product are imported or manufactured with an essential purpose permit derived by Environment and Climate Change Canada. And I prepare a question and answer the question we receive when the new regulation enter in force. So question about section 21.1 is if it's possible to add a compressor to a system that use R22 as a GWP above 150 in a supermarket. Yes, like I said, repairing, transforming, or modifying a unit is permit. When we say power of 50 kilowatt, it's mean electric power, not the refrigerant capacity. About chiller use for food conservation, the section 21.1, it's said for food preservation. So if it's a power greater than 50 kilowatts, it's covered by 21.1, so limit of 150 of GWP refrigerant. Otherwise, it's covered by 21.2, so the limit is 750 for chillers. The limit apply to refrigerant system and not air conditioning unit. So for the moment, we don't have measure for this other than chillers in 2025. And it's about the other question is about the essential purpose permit in the regulation of environment and climate change Canada. They have a measure to divert this permit if the no alternative or economical and security or other. So if the system are import or manufacture under this permit, it's permit on Quebec too. How is a unit defined? It is possible to change only the evaporator or compressor. A unit in our regulation represents all its components. And the other question is about the using a system after the date, and there are no measure for this. So if you install a system with a IGWP before the limit going forth, you can use it. You can repair, you can refill. And a useful link on our website, you can find the regulation, you can find a lot of information about our regulation. You can also find more question and answer. And I also put the link for find the regulation in Quebec. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Pierre-Luc, for a very complete presentation on what Quebec is doing. We have one question on the live chat from Andre Patenaude from Emerson in Canada. Well, he's Canadian, but working for the Emerson group. And I think you basically answered it already, but just to clarify, does the 50 kilowatt rating refer to capacity, refrigerant capacity, or to electrical rating? So you basically said it's to electrical consumption, right?
Yes, it's okay, electric power.
All right, then I have one quick question for you. How different are the Quebec rules to the federal rules?
The difference between federal and Quebec, yes.
It's quite limited, right?
I don't understand.
Okay, est-ce que, I'll ask in French, est-ce que le Québec a pris beaucoup plus d'avance par rapport au niveau fédéral au Canada? Quelles sont les différences entre les deux, entre le niveau fédéral et le niveau québécois?
The most difference is our measure on food preservation with a limit of 150.
Okay.
But the other limit are similar to federal, and we also consider the essential permit they can emit, and we are aligned with the rest, but we go more in supermarket and this sector because alternative
are available.
Yes,
yeah,
it's possible
okay.
to.
And Quebec has been a leader in that space for a long time now. Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so now we have time for some general questions, or some specific ones and some general ones. There's about 15 questions. So we won't get to answer all of them. We won't get to ask all of them. However, can I ask all panelists to just take time after this session to just go into the chat and maybe answer some of those questions that are directed to you so that we have a record of that, or at least there's an opportunity to chat. We have one from Debbie. That's an original one. Do any of the panel members foresee the possibility of using ammonia in residential AC units? What are the barriers? Tony, you're muted. Someone needs to unmute Tony. I can't. Yeah, right.
Yeah, the standards that we're working on are focusing on industrial and into commercial.
Refrigeration, but not
restriction
AC.
on residential, but we're not focusing on it this time. So the answer is could be someday.
Yeah, a decade away. Well, okay. All right. Second question, another question. This is for CARB. When are the proposed regs expected to go into effect if the board approves them in December?
Well, they would go into effect essentially 1 year from that date. So the 2022 low GWP requirement for refrigeration is absolutely met, and 2023 for air conditioning as well. So essentially, once it's adopted, it's in effect, and then it's like legal in 1 year.
Okay. Okay. So we're basically 12 months away. Should it be adopted by the board? All right. Okay. One from AJ, again for CARB. Last conference, CARB was thinking of requiring all stores to have exact charge nameplates on all racks. Is this still in the works?
Yes, one of our requirements is have a label, and we would like to know what the charge is. I mean, obviously, if it's, it doesn't have to be down to the gram, but yeah, I mean, it's important, right? Because we have that 50-pound threshold, and it'll be important for the end users and to be in compliance.
Great, thank you. Another one for IIR. Since IIR is governed by folks with experience and commercial interest in ammonia, how is IIR shifting the leadership and involvement to cover other refrigeration technology? That's a good question. How is IIR changing?
With the recent standards in development, we've opened it up to the commercial side.
But that's not about the standards. I think he's referring more to the people working within the IIR and how they're engaging with the industry.
Well, the participation on the teams for giving input for the subcommittees and such are bringing in the information. We've had members from the commercial side as well that are bringing their expertise from throughout the world, as well as involved with the standards for CO2 and hydrocarbons.
So you're involving players that have CO2 experience and hydrocarbon experience in developing those standards. That's key. That's key.
That is key.
All right. Okay. And is that reflected also at the leadership level?
Yes.
Okay. All right. One from Benoit, Simcoe, in Canada. Why do AC systems have less stringent rules than refrigeration systems, knowing that the quantity of refrigerant for AC is way more than refrigeration systems in North America? That's probably one for Christina.
Well, I think that this is a challenge, right? We, in the US, unfortunately, standards and codes have a lot to do with this. Why in other markets we've seen lower global warming potential refrigerants become somewhat more available. For example, in India, where there are hydrocarbon ACs on the market. But, you know, unfortunately, I think that governments want to have some near-term reductions, and so they're set with this interim GWP threshold at 750. But I think we expect to see that tightening. You know, I think the EU is about to undergo a process of reevaluating the EU F-gas regulations looking forward. We could see some tightening there of GWP for air conditioning in the future. So I'd say stay tuned, but you know, the options are just limited right now, but more and more, whether you're talking about hydrocarbons or other, you know, HFO-based refrigerants, we're seeing lower GWP options becoming more available all the time. So hopefully more soon, but it's unfortunate that we might have a two-staged transition in air conditioning. It would be much better, as I said, leapfrogging most of these mid-GWP alternatives. So we would urge stakeholders that are doing good R&D in this area to really come forward and be vocal about that, especially in the standards and codes world.
Thank you, Christina. Couple more minutes. A couple more questions. One for California again, from Navid. Why are even the Californian GWP maximums so high at this point, especially when natural refrigerants are viable options?
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to completely agree with what Christina just said. In terms of AC, we set a 750 maximum or a limit because it was feasible. Would we have liked to have set a 150 or a 10 or a 1 limit? Yes. And in terms of the very high GWPs, in terms of the average, I guess, for the stores, again, we have to take into account existing equipment. I mean, you know, if you buy a piece of equipment today, it can have a very high GWP, and our intent is not to strand any equipment. So I guess we just have to realize there's a huge installed base, and that's why we're allowing average GWPs to be high. In terms of less than 50 pounds, we used US EPA SNAP rules, and they're quite lenient. They allow up to about 1,500. Would we like to change that someday? Yes. That 50-pound threshold might disappear at some point in the next 10 years to say everything has to be low GWP.
Okay, then I have a general question for you all. For those that, and I'm sure you're all aware, the EU on the global level has been a leader in this space too, on the regulatory side with the EU F-gas regulation, and they're now reviewing their F-gas regulation. They've started that formal process where they're reaching out to stakeholders, and there are expectations that there will be more bans and more ambition in terms of GWP ratings, not only for refrigeration, but also for air conditioning. And that you could expect these rules to come into play in the next 2 to 3 years. All right, you have to allow for that negotiation to happen in Brussels. Do you anticipate that that could also influence what's going on in the US later on? Will you be following what's going on at the European level? Because a lot of these players are global. We've got Emerson here, they're everywhere, so they'll be active in Europe too. Is that something that you are keep in the back of your minds, or are they completely separate issues?
Mark, this is Rajan. You know, it's not just Europe, but we also do a lot of business in Asia. And so we follow what is required in each of these regions and countries as far as the regulations are concerned. And we have products that meet the needs of the customers in each of those spaces. One of the things I heard all these questions about air conditioning and why can't we just go to a lower GWP? And Christina answered some of that, and so did Glenn. This is a refrigerant conversation. It's not an energy efficiency conversation. But if we had an energy efficiency conference right now, I think one of the things you will find is that there is enormous number of minimum performance standards that are required for air conditioning in every country and in every state. So it becomes a challenge for equipment manufacturers to meet these low GWP requirements at the same time meet a lot of the efficiency minimums that they have to meet. So that is a balance that we strike. And by the way, Mark, another point to also make is not all equipment are created equal in terms of leaks and charge amounts and things like that. So when Glenn and CARB put together all these different proposals, or Quebec or Canada or the EPA for that matter, they take all those factors into account. And what they come up with is a balanced approach that meets the needs of the environment, the needs of the customers, at the same time meets the regulations.
Okay, thank you, Rajan. We're going to have to close. One comment I do want to make regarding the AC debate. It's basically the elephant in the room. Refrigeration is the appetizer. It's the small part in terms of dealing with all of this. We know that. Everyone knows that. And what we did at Shecco or Atmosphere was host an event on AC only earlier in the summer. It's all online. You can find the presentations on atmo.org, where we were trying to kick off the discussion around natural refrigerant air conditioning solutions. And there are some, and they're coming. There are actually quite a few out there, and they're efficient and low GWP. So we expect things to move quite fast on the air conditioning side, just like we had in commercial refrigeration a decade or so ago. Just a comment there that I wanted to make. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining the panel. We got lots of questions. So that's a great way to start the day. And please, panelists, if there's some other questions that we weren't able to cover, so please take the time to reach out to the different participants. Thank you all, and enjoy the quick coffee break. And next we have the utilities. No, now I've forgotten the program. We got another session coming.
Industrial end users and
industrial end users. Sorry, thank you. Very important one. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.